Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are discussing the Emperor of Mankind, and a reveal that, if true, could shake the very foundations of the Imperium. General spoiler warning to begin, as we will be discussing events from across the world of Warhammer 40k, so you have been warned. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So the Emperor of Mankind, the be-all and end-all of the 40k universe. By far and away the most important character in all of the lore bar none. Anytime we receive a scene or reference to him within the lore, you just know business has picked up. And there's really nothing more fascinating than his current status. The reawakening of the Emperor has become the hottest subplot going in the current era, because it can change absolutely everything. The one man who can turn the tide of any war, no matter the odds, is the Emperor of Mankind. And this month we received some fascinating insights into just how the Emperor may have changed since ascending the throne. Now, earlier in the month, the Black Library author Dan Abnett did a Q&A interview with the website Ars Technica. At least I'm assuming it's pronounced that way. I'll drop a link to it in the description, guys, because it's always a great listen hearing from any of the Black Library authors. And of course here, with one of the big guns in Mr. Abnett, it is no different. Now, there's a lot of interesting tidbits and mentions throughout the whole interview, but the ones for me that really stood out was when Dan spoke about the Emperor. Very rarely do we get to see the writer's opinions on this most prominent of characters. So to hear Dan's opinion on him was really quite revealing. The first question in regards to the Emperor was, what would one see if they entered the Emperor's throne room? And Dan's answer is really quite thought-provoking in itself. The ultimate truth is probably something quite horrific. Sitting on something that vaguely resembles something that used to be a throne, but isn't a throne, but is actually just a huge complicated piece of apparatus, with pipes and tubes going everywhere. But even that is doubtful if that is there. To me, the most interesting answer to that is that most people who enter the throne room would probably last 4 or 5 seconds before they were killed, just incinerated by the brightness of the light, destroyed by the currents of the warp that are flying around the throne room, irradiated to the point of instant death by the machines that are running there. It is like the heart of a nuclear reactor that has melted down. It is not in any way, shape or form a conventional throne room that you walk into and bow and look up to the throne. It doesn't work like that. It is a mechanism at the heart of a bigger mechanism, and the notion that there is an emperor sitting on a throne in a throne room is just a part of the myth. It is not a nice place. Now, firstly, obviously it goes without saying this is just Dan's opinion, as you can tell by him beginning his answer with probably. And what a fault it is for the throne room to be considered horrific. The heart of this glorious galaxy-spanning empire. To be in the presence of the Emperor of Mankind. And it's horrific. Now, we're all going to have our own opinions on what we imagine the throne room to be like. And there can be no doubt, the throne room is nowhere near the condition or state it was originally intended for. as we began to see during the heresy the extra resources and service that became needed for the Golden Throne. So after 10,000 years, you can certainly expect it to have evolved or devolved much further. And Dan's viewset is clearly very much one of the grim dark, as you would expect. I love the analogy of it being akin to the heart of a nuclear reactor and the currents of the warp floating around. I think the death within 4 or 5 seconds is a little OTT, as we know Custodes and Mechanicum servants come and go fairly frequently, and we have seen a few other people enter the throne room to be in the presence of the Emperor over the years. Whether or not this is still canon is obviously debatable. So my personal vision of the throne room isn't quite as drastic as Dan's, but I definitely like the theme of it being so far fallen from the throne room of old. Next up we had the question, what does the Emperor truly look like? And Dan gives a fairly lengthy answer here, and goes on to mention something that is the heart of this discussion we are having. The Emperor presents himself like any good god should, in the form that is most useful to him to get across, and Dan then goes on to compare him to the Greek gods. What he looks like is unknown to everybody. What he appears as and manifests as is appropriate to the circumstance. That manifestation, particularly after the Unification War, that manifestation has to be godlike. It has to be as the Emperor. He has to command respect. Okay, so now this is undoubtedly the Emperor as we have seen him throughout the Crusade and the Heresy, often appearing in different forms depending on the situation. More often than not, the golden armoured warrior we have all come to know. However, in times more the man beneath, when in conversation with one of his sons, or a flashback to earlier times, such as when we see him as Revelation, for example. Now Dan states his appearance is unknown to everybody, which I guess is true, as even in Master of Mankind, when we witness the Emperor's earliest memories, it is him sharing this vision with one of his Custodes. So of course the Emperor could well be choosing to show this particular image of himself. Though for me, I don't see any particular reason for the Emperor to deceive the Custodes. Aside from the Primarchs, they are very much his prized creations, and I'm sure some of you would argue even more so. The Custodes are simply incapable of betraying him. They are devoted to him in a way that goes way beyond any natural form of love. So for me, that understated Middle Eastern appearing boy of the ancient Hittite tribe with the long dark hair and dark eyes is most likely the Emperor's true appearance. However, this is where things get really interesting, as Dan continues. The golden vision of the Emperor, the religious trappings with the saints etc. are almost like a necessary psychological defense to keep the people of the 40k universe sane. And it speaks to the fact that the Emperor is probably not around as much as he'd like to be, that he hasn't done anything about it yet. Or, if he is around as much as he'd like to be, if he is genuinely watching over everybody in a higher psychic way, maybe he has come to the conclusion what he needs to be now is a god. The only way for humanity to survive is to trust in something divine above them. because otherwise with the rise of chaos everything would be too horrible to bear, and everything would be collapsing overnight. It is not definitively official, because again it strays into the mystery box we don't talk about. But I know it is headcanon shared by most of the key writers, and I believe therefore it makes it semi-official. Now if you watch the interview, Dan just kind of rattles this off as if it's nothing. But to loreheads like me, this is actually a major revelation. Yes, he makes it clear it is not official, because it's part of the mystery they can't talk about. But it's shared opinion of most of the key writers. And considering these are the guys creating and writing the narrative for us, until we get shown otherwise, let's be honest, it basically is definitive. Or at least unofficially definitive, as Dan says. The Emperor has most likely come to the conclusion he needs to be a god, and that humanity needs to trust in something divine above them to survive. Man, where do you begin with that? This could not be any further from the Imperial truth. The Imperial truth the Emperor himself founded the Imperium on. That he is not a god. That there are no gods. And that he does not desire or wish to be one. To free mankind from the shackles of religious worship. And here now, 10,000 years later, there's the distinct possibility, and again we'll say possibility as it's technically not confirmed, although come on, Dan basically just confirmed it, that he now knows he needs to be a god. To be the God Emperor of mankind. I'm just not sure how to take that. The first half of Dan's answer, it speaks to the fact that the Emperor is probably not around as much as he'd like to be, that he hasn't done anything about it. Now that sounds like the Emperor we all know and love. This makes sense taking into account everything we know about him. There's just no way he would ever wish to be worshipped. But then to follow it up with, maybe he has come to the conclusion what he needs to be now is a god. The only way for humanity to survive is to trust in something divine above them. Pardon the pun here, but this is anathema to everything the Emperor ever believed in or fought for. To truly understand the Emperor's crusade and mindset on religion, I cannot recommend enough for those of you who have never read or listened to go check out the Horus Heresy short story, The Last Church. I will drop a link to the audiobook on the Black Library website in this description. It's written by Graham McNeill and narrated by the undoubted voice of the Emperor, Jonathan Keeble. And in it, the Emperor has a debate with a priest. Whether you think the Emperor is right or wrong is unimportant. What is important is you understand the Emperor's viewpoint, the core of his goals. His entire existence is fundamentally opposed to religious worship, to free humanity from this logic. To have humanity worship him is, for want of a better expression, heresy. Look, I'm not saying it's a right or wrong direction to take. As always, that's down to everyone's own individual opinions. That's the beauty of the lore. For me personally, I much prefer that first explanation of the only reason the Imperial Creed and worship has taken over is simply because the Emperor hasn't been able to do anything about it. It's one of the integral parts of the tragedy of 40k. The Emperor becomes the one thing he never wanted to be. He sought to free humanity from worship, and instead becomes its focus. Again, for me, to have him kind of accept that, whether through necessity or not, does kind of diminish his story in my eyes. Let's be clear, the Emperor is to all intents and purposes a god. I don't think anyone can debate that now. The Imperium's worship of him has raised him to levels of power he has never been at before. But does that mean he has to accept it? I'm not so sure. Now, on the other hand, you could say, what option does the Emperor truly have? The Imperium has been ripped asunder, and the threat of chaos is at a level now never seen. Despite his imprisonment upon the throne, he is now more powerful than ever, most likely due to the worship of his entire race. Knowing how utterly dedicated the Emperor is to defeating chaos, is it unrealistic to say he wouldn't decide to use the weapon of faith? If it meant giving him an opportunity to not only take the fight back to chaos, but to finally, ultimately, defeat it. I could definitely see him doing that. Once chaos is dealt with, he could then decide to re-implement the Imperial truth, all over again. Chaos is, after all, the ultimate threat. Regardless, going down this road certainly raises more questions. His returning Primarchs, for example, are wholly and completely dedicated to his vision of the Imperial truth, as we see now with the returned Rabute, who is disgusted by what the Imperium has become, who barely manages to repress his anger at it enough to deal with the larger threat of chaos. How would he react if his father was to then turn around and inform him that he is a god? How would the rest of the returning Primarchs react? That is a major discussion point right there. I can't see any of them being happy about it, even with their love and loyalty to their father. But I mean, can you imagine Jagatai's reaction? A father he always called a tyrant, now declaring himself a god. Man, that would be something to see. Honestly, it's a fascinating debate, and knowing the key writers do mostly have this in mind when they're writing, certainly is a bit of a game changer now when it comes to the future of the Emperor. It's certainly upped the ante on where Guy Haley is going to take the Emperor next in Godblight, which is coming up for pre-order very soon. Man, I think there's going to be something very impactful in those pages. But as always guys, what do you think? Do you think the Emperor has decided he needs to be a god? Or do you think he would just never embrace that philosophy, regardless of the situation? Is he happy about the religious worship or not? And where would you like to see the Emperor's story go next? Like I said, check out the interview with Dan, it's a really good listen. And if you've never read or listened to The Last Church, definitely check that audiobook out too. It's a real interesting listen. But as always guys, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.